Hey there, all you people. Hey there, all you people. Look at something to see. Yes, welcome to the second quarter. My amazing vocals are as good as ever, and I'm here to talk to you about the Progressive Era, okay? So let's go ahead and get it started. So the Progressive Era, what a time. Really, we're talking about, after. So we've talked about, industrialization, urbanization, immigration, new inventions. And, while a lot of these things are good, they, lead to bad things, like corrupt cities, dirty cities, poor treatment of immigrants, poor treatment of other people, corruption. And we're going to talk about basically a period of American history where a group of people called the Progressives seek to fix all of societal ills brought on by industrialization. Whoop, whoop! So here we go. Industrialization brings problems. The rapid transition of the nation from an agrarian state to an industrial one brought several problems, including industrial capitalism, urbanization, and political corruption. So, I can move on here, get this through. There we go. All right, move my little recorded face here. Awesome. Industrial capitalism refers to a system in which trade and industries are privately owned and operated for profit. Some entrepreneurs became enormously wealthy, as we know. Companies owned by John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, as well as several others, grew more powerful by driving small companies out of business. Many held the view that major industries should be allowed to grow without government interference. The belief that government should not touch your business was laissez-faire, which is actually French for hands-off, laissez-faire capitalism. Many in government felt that allowing businesses to operate with fewer rules would lead to the best and cheapest goods. As a result, by the 1890s, monopolies, yes, the board game, had grown to dominate many of the nation's largest industries. A monopoly is a company that controls most or all the business in a particular industry. So, like steel, owned the entire steel industry, its production, its creation, its sale, owned by Andrew Carnegie. The entire oil industry, its production, its creation, its sale, owned by John D. Rockefeller. Railroads, the Vanderbilts. I mean, the list goes on and on. But these large monopolies control the entire industry. You can't even get going if you're a small business railroad kind of guy. And the aim of monopoly is to get rid of that competition so that sellers can control the prices. If Carnegie controls all the steel in America, he can sell it for whatever he wants. In 1865, most Americans, of course, lived in the countryside. But by 1920, as I have mentioned, major urban centers dominated America more. This is urbanization. Many rural families and immigrants came to find work in the factories and greater opportunities. Other families came from the farms, where the jobs have been replaced by new machinery. Some moved to the city because of cultural attractions, theaters, museums, libraries, like this beautiful one. There was also, of course, political corruption. Gasp! City governments were often run by corrupt political machines, led by political bosses. Basically, either the boss or the small group told the workers and supporters of the machine what to do. The political machines often provided jobs and other services to immigrants and the poor in exchange for their vote or support on certain issues, or themselves. The power of a political boss, wow, everything's going crazy, haywire, depends upon his ability to dominate voting and control city government. By controlling city elected officials, political bosses were able to hand out government patronage jobs to loyal workers who supported them. They used their control of City Hall to make illegal profits on city contracts by collecting bribes. While political machines were corrupt, they did help immigrants settle into their new homelands, obtain jobs, find housing. Political machines were often the ones to get streets paved, extend a water pipe, or approve a needed construction project. But these services came at a very high price in the world of corruption. Also, during this period of time, the farmers attempted reform. Organized movements began to emerge in the United States as a reaction to the harmful effects on industrialization. Most prominent among these were the farmers. The Farmers Alliance, organized in the 1870s and 80s, sought to end the harmful effects facing farmers. They wanted government regulations of the railroads, establishment of an income tax to control excessive profits, and laws that would place the burden of farmers faced with heavy debts. In 1892, the Farmers Alliance joined with a new group called the Populist Party. The Populists represented farmers, laborers, factory workers against bankers and railroads. The Populists believed that corporations had too much influence on government. They felt they could not count on major parties to get the needed reform. The Populists wanted the federal government to take the responsibility for the people's well-being in regulating the banks and helping farmers. In 1892, the Populists even started running their own presidential candidates, who actually won some states. The progressive movement started by the middle class. All this corruption and change leads to the progressive movement. And the progressive movement was really started by middle-class city dwellers who emerged between 1900 and the start of World War I. The primary goal of the progressives was to correct the political and economic injustices that caused America's rapid industrialization. They were appalled by the growth of inequality between America's poor and the wealthy. To do this, they sought to reform government itself, which had been corrupted by the big business and the political machines. They were helped out by a group called the Muckrakers, something you'll get to become later on. The expansion of cities and newspapers and magazines reached large audiences during this time. Investigative reporters, such as writers and social scientists, exposed the abuses of industrial society and government corruption. These writers, known as muckrakers, because they raked up the muck or dirt of American life. You see, cities used to be so filthy that they used to have people that would literally rake the muck from the streets. That's where they get the term muckraker and apply it to these investigative journalists. This show is brought to you by coffee, fueling the spirit of the American dream. So the muckrakers examined the rise of industry and the abuses that had often led to the accumulation of large fortunes. They also looked at business practices affecting consumers, the lives of the very poor. I love this muckraking thing about the meat scandal. Just wait till you read about that later on. Watch this video if you want about muckrakers. Progressive reforms also occurred not just at the national level, but also at the state level. The progressives provided one of the best examples of Americans attempting to overcome problems through reform. The early progressives identified political and social problems and provided individual or local efforts to remedy the issues. Progressives were so shaken by the abuses of industrial society that some made individual efforts at reform. Settlement houses in many cities were started in slum neighborhoods. These settlement houses provided child care, nursing services, and English lessons to new immigrants. To help improve the quality grants to further help improve the quality of life, settlements organized job clubs, offered after-school recreation, provided public health services, and pushed for improved housing for the poor and the working class. Like this here. There were also municipal city reforms. Other progressives focused on correcting the abuses of municipal-level government. They sought to prevent corruption and make government more efficient. Progressives would replace the rule of bosses and machines with public-minded mayors who cared about you. They expanded civil services to deal with overcrowding, fire hazards, and the lack of public safety and services. Cities often took direct ownership of utilities such as water, electricity, and gas. At the state level, progressive governors fought corruption and negative influences of big business. Progressives introduced political reforms in many states, such as the initiative, referendum, and the recall. These reforms made the government more accountable to the people and increased public participation in the matters of government itself. Recall Free initiative and referendum are both defined here as ways that can both increase political participation. Elected officials in the recall could be removed from office by voters in special elections. In initiatives, voters could directly introduce bills into state legislatures and could vote on whether they wanted a bill to pass or not. In a referendum, voters could compel legislators to place a bill on the ballot for approval. There was also the secret ballot. Voters were less subject to the pressures and intimidation when they could vote in secret. And there were direct party primaries. Special elections were held to determine whom party members wanted as a candidate. There were also, direct elections of senators. Senators who were elected directly by the people instead of state legislatures. Also, again, there were progressive reforms at the national level. Between 1901 and 1919, President Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson launched a series of great progressive reforms which helped correct many of the issues in society. Through much of the late 1800s, corruption had been widespread at the federal government as well as the state. Government jobs were used to reward people who made contributions and helped in their political campaigns. As the federal government grew larger, a need arose for a much more qualified group of civil servants. In 1882, this was made more apparent when President Garfield was shot by a disappointed office seeker. In 1883, this inspired the Pendleton Act, creating Civil Service Commission reform. The commission gave competitive exams and chose people based on the merits instead of their political views. President Teddy Roosevelt, who is an absolute giant of American history. If I had more time left in this video, I would go on the greatest rant of all time. Please feel free to read more about Teddy. But President Roosevelt was suspicious of big business and opposed unfair and anti-competitive practices. When Roosevelt was elected president, he set out to end the practice of large businesses, lowering prices to put small competitors out of business. He also sought to prevent groups of businesses from raising their prices together. Now, to accomplish this goal, he broke up the Rockefeller Standard Oil monopoly. And in the Northern Securities case, President Roosevelt gained the reputation as a trust buster, which you'll read more about this week. In 1902, Roosevelt instructed the Justice Department to break up the railroad monopoly that controlled the routes from Chicago to the Pacific coast. And the Northern Securities Company appealed their case all the way to the Supreme Court, where the court ruled in favor of the government's action. Now, they did more than this. In the Newland Act of 1902, a federal law that funded irrigation projects in 20 western states, creating greater water and farming opportunities for the people out there. The Pure Food and Drug Act regulated the preparation of foods and sale of medicines. The Meat Inspection Act, Upton Sinclair's account of the meat packing industry, shocked the nation, which I'll read more about. The act provided for government inspection of meat. President Woodrow Wilson was another great progressive. Woodrow Wilson was elected president in 1912, and during his campaign he promised he would tame the big businesses. He especially focused his attention on attacking the banking system and the powerful trusts. Once elected, he quickly pushed several reforms through the Congress, such as the National Park Service, which created a service to conserve and protect natural scenery at federal parks, historic objects, and wildlife for the enjoyment of the American people. Graduated income tax, in which taxpayers are taxed at higher rates than less well-off taxpayers. And the Federal Reserve Act. The act reformed the banking industry by establishing 12 regional Federal Reserve banks that regulate how much money is in circulation and how much money banks could lend. Now, I know I steamrolled through that last bit, but hopefully you got all of it. Again, email me if you have any questions at ksearcy@spartan.limacityschools.org. Have a good week, guys.